coming. My name is Martin, and this is my colleague Paul. We're from Larian Studios combat design team, and we're here to talk about how to design combats as puzzles and how we can make unforgettable experiences with a wide range of resources and design philosophies, and basically how some of the combats in Baldur's Gate were made. So before we start, this is fair warning. Because of some contextual information we have to give about some of the fights that we're going to be giving examples of, there are going to be spoilers. In case you haven't finished the game, or in case you just don't want to know everything, unfortunately, this is fair warning that there's going to be spoilers. So, first and foremost, how are combats made anyways? In Larian Studios, at least. So we have 6 steps from the conception of a fight up until it's considered done, per se. The first is the request. Leadership says, okay, we need a fight here because the party encounters a character, and then suddenly the player chooses, let's just say, a dialogue option that leads to violence or a disagreement, and they have to fight. So leadership comes, says to us something along these lines, and then we start researching what the narrative brief is, who this character is, what the context is this character rich or poor, and this is going to influence maybe the equipment type they have, the items they have, do they have scrolls, are they casters, are they melee characters? So what makes sense in the game world narrative-wise? We cannot just make any kind of combat just because we want to. We have some narrative constraints. Then we do something we call raw research. When we talk in Larian Studios, when we talk about raw, we mean the base D&D rules. For example, if said combat involves, for example, a spectator, we cannot just add mechanics that don't already exist out of the blue, because players are going to expect something that looks and is named spectator to do a set of mechanics and attacks similar to what they already know from pen and paper, tabletop, Dungeons and Dragons. Then we do combat research. And what we mean with combat research is that we very intentionally try combats not to be the same one to another. So we try to avoid that as much as possible. So we go back, we see what we already made, and see, okay, what have we not tried yet that fits this narrative brief that we were given, so that we can give a wide range of experiences for our players. Then we design the actual combat puzzle. And again, we cannot do anything at any point in the game, because it's not the same a combat for a level 12 party than a level 3 party. They have different sets of mechanics, different level of understanding of how the game works, different items. So we take all of that into account within a certain range of variety, because we cannot say, hey, we are going to make a combat for a rogue, a barbarian, a monk, and a paladin, because we don't really know what the party composition is going to be like. So we choose a certain set of restrictions, and we move on with designing the puzzle per se. And then the actual implementation. We see how we can make the different mechanics from raw as close as possible, because we do have technical constraints. We don't have unlimited resources. We have development time, art time, and everything that has to be taken into account. And design constraints as well. Some things that work in paper don't really work in video game format. So yeah, we do the implementation, and then we iterate on it up until we like the combat that we have in our hands. Okay, so how do we make combats as puzzle per se, right? It all depends. At the very beginning, I said that leadership comes to us with a request, and we usually categorize that as gold, silver, or bronze. This is going to tell us what type of production cost restraints that we're going to have, and how many things we can request from other departments. A gold combat usually means that we have a wide variety or wide freedom of requesting new models, new animations, new VFX, new everything, because it's either a critical path fight that is very important to the narrative, or it's a boss fight that we really want to emphasize, like on a unique mechanic that we have to teach and implement for that fight alone, that we're not going to reuse ever. So that's unique assets that, for example, for a silver or bronze fight, we would be strongly discouraged to ask, because again, the game is very big. Silver combats, we can still have one BFX or two or something, but there's not that much freedom, so design-wise, we have to start to get more creative on how to create more diverse and unique experiences with not that much production costs. And then bronze is usually use whatever we already have and try to make it unique. So that's when we really start getting creative with our engine and, like, I don't know, usually doing like explosions on death, which players don't really know, or new statuses that inflict some kind of curse on an area, which is really, really cheap to use and to do, but it's nonetheless really interesting to play against. Okay, so what we're going to do right now, at least I am going to present an example of each of these quality standards, and to give you a brief example of the different challenges that we had in those combats. So let's start with gold. So the first case study for gold is the Steelwatcher Titan. So the request itself was that we really needed Gortash, which is one of the three main antagonists of the game, to have a guardian of something that was very valuable to him. So in the game, he's the creator of the Steel Watchers, which are the three smaller-looking enemies that are right next to the big one, and those are seen in the public, and in the public I mean in Baldur's Gate, walking around and patrolling. And the Titan itself is not. It's something unique. It's something that the player sees for the first time, and only one time. So this is a boss fight, and we were told that this has to be very memorable to players. So it was given gold quality. Gortash himself is the chosen of Bane, the chosen of Bane, and Bane is the god of tyranny. So we had to represent tyranny in this fight. So how do we represent tyranny in a fight? Well, that is something that first we went into raw research and said, okay, Gortash is something of an inventor, and he's also a tyrant. Let's see other constructs in the game, in D&D. What are the statuses? What are they immune to? What do they usually have? And so we just saw that we didn't have any raw restrictions, but we did have a set of guidelines and things that we could take advantage of. One of those things, and this is something that I'm very grateful that I did my proper research on, was immutable form, because otherwise, I myself personally didn't like people polymorphing the Titan into a ship, or banishing the Titan for 3 turns, and it was going to make the fight super easy. So I just said, like, hey, this already exists in raw, so it's like an excuse that I have to use it in my fights, and it's not going to feel forced because, hey, it's Dungeons & Dragons, it already exists. So this is one of the challenges that I was able to surpass, using raw to not make the fight super exploitable. There are like a million other ways you can kill the thing in like 1 turn or whatever, like bonus action thing, etc. But the thing still remains. It is very similar to what they do in raw, and we really want that experience to be as close as possible to D&D. Okay, then again, because this is a boss fight, we don't really have fights like this, so we didn't really have constraints in this way. And then while designing the puzzle, the phase 1, we wanted to represent oppression. Like we want to go back to the tyranny theme, and oppression was one way we could represent tyranny. So the way that we do that is by applying statuses that do not let you move, or that take away some of that freedom and allowing multi-attacks or combos between the enemies, taking advantage of those statuses. So that way, players can feel like they need to sort of escape or work around the different restraints that the enemies are giving them. Then again, in the second phase, which we want to represent injustice to sort of complement the oppression of tyranny, we go into the Titan goes into a bulwark mode, which was specifically designed to feel like anything that you do against it is not working because it has magical resistance, it has higher AC, it heals itself, so it feels really unjust. So we wanted to represent that in order to give a brief and short sense of hopelessness to the players. But once they understood what was happening, they could say, okay, I can maybe exploit this thing into removing the bulwark mode, and I'm going to be like cheesing the fight. But that was always intentional. Like we left a couple of avenues open for the player to feel like they're smart, even though it was already designed into the fight itself. Some of those unfairness or unjust statuses are unyielding construct, only attacks that a certain threshold can damage the Titan. So suddenly if you have a character that deals 6 attacks in a row but with very little damage each, then that's going to be useless. So you have to go with like your Paladin with Smite or some sort of hard-hitting attacks. And Repair Matrix, which heals it every single turn, which feels unjust because it feels like you're getting your progress taken away from you because the health bar suddenly goes up. So we did leave a few of avenues open for the players to circumvent this puzzle, and this is also part of the design. There's freedom of movement that allows the players not to be either crippled, prone, or any other statuses that impede movement, so that the Titan would no longer be able to do the multi-attack, which is a really damaging attack that the Titan has. Misty Step, so even if you're crippled or whatever, if you cannot move, you can still teleport away. Globe of Invulnerability, Wall of Stone to block the path. Hold Monster to just hard CC the Titan, or even like Stunning Strike to also hard CC the Titan. So even though the Titan has a whole bunch of things it's immune to, there's still a whole bunch of other tools for the player to sort of try to solve the puzzle in their minds to say, hey, how can I surpass this challenge? And for them to feel smart. Because we never say, hey, use Hold Monster here. It's all in the player's mind. They just have to think about it and feel smart about it. They have to improvise, adapt, and overcome. So the case study for Silver, it's a Sandbox murder trial. So in here, the request was to make honor to a returning character from previous Baldur's Gate games. Sarabok was the main antagonist and the final boss fight for Baldur's Gate 1. So we immediately knew that whatever we were going to do with him combat-wise had to be not a one-to-one relationship to what it was in the previous games, because the type of game is different. Ours is turn-based. But it had to reflect that. It had to make justice to what it already did in the previous games. We cannot just create anything and call it a day. So we went ahead and we talked with narrative. What was the situation? What was the story? How was he here? Because he supposedly died, and all these kinds of things. And we ended up picking up a very important piece of information, which was that Sarabok has the ability to absorb the essence of other Balspawn. Or at least we came to that understanding per se. And this is going to be very important when I start explaining the puzzle itself. Then in terms of raw research, now we don't only look into what is traditional Dungeons & Dragons, but also the previous Baldur's Gate games, the appearances that Sarevok has on Magic the Gathering, like every single place where he appears, we usually try to research it and see how it plays out. What are his powers, his abilities, what he does, etc. Yes. In terms of combat research, one thing that we established very at the beginning of the design of the combat itself was that we wanted to do sort of a parallel of the final boss fight from Baldur's Gate 1 into this murder trial combat. So we wanted Sarevok to be the main damage dealer, and then to have different supporting characters that would buff him or debuff the party. So, because that's sort of what happens at the end of Baldur's Gate 1. So with that information in mind, and knowing that Sarevok can actually absorb the essences of other Bhaalspawn, what we did was, since Amelisant and Ilasara were already at the location, and they are the ghosts of other Bhaalspawn, we decided that Sarevok can actually absorb the echo of these three ghosts. Because these three ghosts are the characters that buff him up, and if you kill them, they permanently buff him up anyways, but in sort of a different way. So the puzzle here that we wanted to do is, okay, how will players tackle the fight? Will they kill the ghost first, all of them, and then try to kill Sarevok, but now he's much stronger than at the beginning of the fight? Will they try to murder Sarevok and then go for the ghosts, but the ghosts are buffing them and they are debuffing the party? So there was no clear answer. And that's also part of the puzzle itself. Like, what is the kill order that the players are going to take in order to surpass this challenge? If they have enough CC, they could just hard CC all of the ghosts and fight Sarevok by himself. If they have banishment, for example, upcasted banishment can let you banish up to 3 targets. You can banish the ghosts and fight Sarevok alone, which is going to be much easier than if you have the supporting ghosts. So there's a lot of ways that players can solve the puzzle, but the important part here is for them to understand what the consequences are for killing the ghost first and buffing Sarevok, or going it the other way around, because they're going to be hard CC'd, the players. So yeah, basically, kill order is the puzzle of this fight. And then, last but not least, we have Halsin's Portal, which is a bronze fight, or at least internally it's considered a bronze fight. So the request was to use the existing game assets to their full potential. Because this is for Act 2, which we have a lot of characters that we only use once, like the Shadow-Cursed Crows, Shadow Mastiffs, Shadow-Cursed Flaming Fist, or Githyanki, or whatever the factions, which are just, quote-unquote, just NPCs with a status, which changes the way they play. So we saw that we have a lot of assets that were not really reused that much, and that we really thought that we could make a little bit more of what they already were. So the narrative brief, it was that Halsin needed to rescue a character from a different plane of existence, and he had to go through this portal, but doing so would enrage the curse that is upon the land. So the curse itself would throw everything against you to try and destroy the portal and prevent Halsin from coming back. So as soon as we saw that, we clearly saw that it needed to be like a defense objective type of fight, which first and foremost, we don't really do that much in the game. And another thing that we really don't do much is combat by waves of like, combat starts and has like 5 enemies, and then it has 10, and then it has 15 in different rounds. So we don't really do that type of fights that much. So it was perfect for a bronze fight, because it meant that suddenly we just have to spawn more characters, quote unquote, just spawn more characters, and then suddenly the fight's gonna feel more unique, because we don't really do that in the game too much. So by doing the raw research was basically seeing what other characters or monsters were in the game at that point of the game and essentially reuse them. We didn't change the mechanics, we didn't change anything. We also took advantage of the player already knowing what these characters do in a fight to sort of just letting them go. Because normally in a fight, we have, when we introduce a new character, we or wait for the second round to introduce a new power, or we do some kind of combat magic for players to understand in a controlled pace what the characters do without them feeling overwhelming. Or at least that we would try to do. Something unique design-wise. This is about the fight being in waves. And then the puzzle. As I said before, we decided to go for a defense objective. They have to defend the portal. One of the real threats that I knew that was going to be were the ranged characters, because the way the level design is made, you could very easily put 4 of your party members in a line and block the entrance to the portal, so melee characters will no longer be able to reach them, but ranged characters do. So suddenly players had to think of different ways of preventing that. One of the ways, casting darkness on a big area so that ranged characters cannot see where they have to shoot. Blindness, also the same. They cannot see, they cannot attack from far. Spike growth, even for characters that are nearing, they start taking damage. And the level design was very much taken into account for this. If you notice, the level design is made in a way that it's a corridor. Doesn't really look like it, but it's a corridor. So if you put something here that damages them, as they start moving in, they kill themselves, basically. So that was also designed intentionally. Of course, we always have Spirit Guardians, which is so OP for Act 2, but hey, it's raw, we cannot change it, and we will not change it, especially since it feels really good. You have Fireball, you can just attract all of them to a single place and Fireball, and they are dead, basically. Or use barrels. The players are not restrained to spells, they can use items, they can use abilities, spatial awareness. So we take all of that into account while making combats. And the puzzle here is, okay, which of my toolkit, because these are not the only ones, but which of the tools on my toolkit can I use to prevent them from damaging the portal? And that's it. We didn't really have to create more models, more spells, more items, more anything. That was it, basically. So now I'm going to leave Paul to talk for a while.
So, it's not always about a combat quality, and when we're trying to make a combat unique, we have other types of limitations and other things to consider. One of those things are factions. Factions are cohesive groups of people that fight together. To keep that cohesion, we create archetypes. Archetypes are a set of equipment, spells, and abilities that we can quickly assign to characters to create those faction combats. This is really good for us to make combats quick, but then we have to make sure to add something unique to those combats to avoid being repetitive. So, how do we make those faction combats unique? We'll see what we did in the Githyanki Crash. The Githyanki Crash is the place where Githyanki hatch, race, and train their kids for combat. This place will be filled with Githyanki archetypes, and we need to make sure that combats against those archetypes don't feel repetitive. So, first we look at creating the archetypes. We look at the monster manual and other sources, and we see that Githyanki are mostly fighters with cool psionic abilities. So we will lean on that. So first we have the warrior archetype. This Githyanki will greatswords and have the ability to parry your attacks to reduce the incoming damage. Then we have the riders. Riders are ranged fighters that wield heavy crossbows and that can rally their allies to give them a buff of extra HP. Then we have the Gishes. Gishes are also melee fighters but they have the ability to cast a spell and then attack you in the same turn. And finally, since this is the place where Githyanki raise their children, we have the Githyanki youth. These are teenagers that are still in training, but that will join combat against the players. So we use those archetypes to populate all the combats in the Githyanki Crash, and now we have to use our tricks to make sure that combats don't feel repetitive. So let's look at the captain's room. This is the place where you will find Captain Theresin. She is the leader of this Githyanki Crash. So this gives us an excuse to make the captain a stronger version of our archetypes. So what we do is we give her better stats, we give her more HP, but most importantly, we give the captain the ability to parry attacks like the Githyanki warriors, but also to cast spells and strike you in the same turn like the Githyanki Gishes. So now players have this character that has the strength of two of the archetypes they've already seen, and they have to deal with all of those in a single character. Then we have the training room. This is the place where the teacher, Savage, is training the Githyanki youth for combat. So this place will be filled with the Githyanki youth archetype, which is our weakest archetype. So to make this combat unique, what we can do here is make the weakest archetype be the stronger one. So to do that, we give an ability to the teacher that can buff a Githyanki youth with extra HP and extra damage. And so this combat ends up being a balance between removing the buff from the Githyanki youth by removing the extra HP, while trying to kill the teacher that is giving more buffs each turn to the Githyanki youth. And finally, we have the hatchery. This is the place where Githyanki lay their eggs in pools of acid to make them grow. So this room is filled with acid surfaces. So we can lean on that dangerous environment to create a unique combat. So what we do is we place traps that push your characters into the pools of acid. We fill the air with Githyanki pheromones that buff Githyanki and debuff non-Githyanki. And we add magical traps below the pools of acid that teleport your characters to a closed metal cell inside the pools of acid. So this combat ends up being a fight for the high ground, the safe ground, and both players and the Githyanki archetypes are constantly trying to push the other side into the pools of acid and into the traps. So to quickly recap, the tricks we use here to make the factions, the Githyanki faction combats unique are we made an elite version of our archetypes with the powers of two of our previous archetypes that players have already seen. We make the weakest archetype be the stronger one, thanks to a buff that is unique to that combat. And we made our archetypes behave differently in combat because we have placed them in a different environment. Now, another limitation that we have is what we call a raw versus engine limitation. These are the cases where we have to use a monster from Dungeons and Dragons that have abilities that we cannot support. So in these cases, we need to make sure to keep the monster's theme and make it recognizable for the veteran players while working with our limitations and still make a unique combat. So the missiles are an example of that. Missiles in Dungeons and Dragons are creatures that come to your party, they garrote one of your characters, and then they teleport it far, far away to kidnap them. This garrote, this grappling, uses the rules for grappling from Dungeons and Dragons, and our engine does not support it. And this kidnapping means that our combat AI has to teleport to a faraway place, and we also do not support that. So we need to keep these abilities, but gave it a twist to keep the theme and make it unique. So we look first at the garrote. We don't support grappling because we cannot have the missile be on top of any possible character the player can have or the player can be. The player can be a gnome, it can be a giant dragonborn, it can be a bird, or it can have a pet crab. And we cannot have the missile be on top of all those creatures. What we can do is, with some VFX, we can make it look like this garrote is a lasso that the missile has put on you. And this way, we have this way of faking this garrote. And for the long-distance teleport, we don't want characters calculating places so far away from the combat, because we don't want them bleeding into other combats or other situations. But what our combat AI can do is calculate places that are far away from other characters, that are alienated. So we can do that to still make it an interesting ability of teleportation. So we go with these ideas. And what we have is the missiles will come to your party members, and they will use their garrote ability. This creates this shadowy rope on the character's neck that also silences them. So we make the casters more vulnerable with this garrote. And then we have this shadowy rope between the missile and the character. What players can do in this case is they can separate themselves 5 meters from the missiles, and they can do that by pushing the missile, or they can risk and move away from the missile. This will trigger an attack of opportunity from the missile, but it still gives the casters a chance to break free of the garrote. And finally, when the missiles have garroted your characters, they start teleporting and spreading them around. So now each character has to fend for themselves with their missiles. And this creates an interesting dynamic where the martial classes that don't depend on casting usually are the ones that get rid of their missiles the quickest. And so they have to run and go kill the missiles that are garroting their casters. And finally, the last limitation we'll talk is what we call scope versus resources. These are cases where the narrative brief and the narrative requirements are really, really strong and suggest a combat of gold quality. But then, for this particular combat, we don't have the resources allotted for that quality. So in this case, we have a gold narrative and a bronze combat allotment of resources. So this is the case of Taris, the Githyanki prodigy. Taris is a Githyanki youth that has a very troubled life. So he has very strong psionics. He has been dragged to grow very, very fast. So he's 1 week old and he's already a teenager. He has been brainwashed to do always good and followed a code of honor and justice. He will fight alone here. He doesn't know how to actually fight because, again, he's 1 week old. Nobody has taught him how to fight. And finally, he went crazy and he killed everybody around. So this is clearly a boss battle. It has a really strong narrative. And we start going wild with our ideas. So maybe Taris can dominate half your party and you have to fight each other. Or maybe Taris is so strong that unless you stop him, he will explode with power and will kill everybody around. Or maybe he finds a way to create copies of himself to fight for him. And then we're told that although the narrative for this combat is really strong, the combat per se is not of gold quality, so we cannot request new assets or new tech for this combat. But still, we don't want to make this a boring combat. We don't want to make a fight that feels repetitive. So we think that with some reusing of assets and with some clever scripting, we can still do something that is unique and spectacular for this Githyanki. So uh, he will fight alone. So we need an ability that we give him is to create those mental copies from your mental energy. So he will target a zone, and the characters that are inside this zone will have their mental energy stilled, and from that mental energy, it will create a ghost, a psychic ghost. And we can reuse the ghost shader that we already have for our ghost creatures, and we tint it purple to give this psychic appearance. And we also reuse this mental link psionic BFX to link that particular copy to your character. Now, again, since he will be fighting alone, we need to make sure that he will have enough copies to fight for him. So we give the copies an ability that each time they strike someone successfully, another copy is created. So now this starts creating a combat where you have to balance destroying your copies while trying to kill Taris. And to double down on this idea, instead of killing you by dealing damage, we'll make it so each copy that is created from your character reduces their mental abilities by 2. And if one of those mental abilities reaches 0, you die. You are insta-kill, brain death, and you cannot do nothing about it. So again, this creates this balance between destroying copies and killing Taris, but also creates a dynamic of I will ignore my copies and I will ignore Taris to go and destroy one of the copies of my party member that is one copy away from being insta-killed. And since he's a solo combatant, we need to make sure he doesn't die during the first round of combat. So we give him this psionic skin ability that removes all negative conditions from Taris at the start of his turn. Players can still use CC on him, and his party members will benefit from that advantage on attack or that critical hit on attack. But as soon as Taris gets his turn, all his negative conditions will be removed, and this way we make sure that he will take a turn during each of the combat rounds. And finally, we give him this ability of shun through space. So when you deal damage to Taris, he will use his reaction to teleport to the farthest place away from the attacker. This at first might seem frustrating because the player moved to attack Taris, and now he teleported to the other place. But players can learn that mechanic, and then they can make him teleport exactly where they want him to be. And so we managed to do this combat. So we reuse assets, BFX, SFX, from most of our psionic spells and abilities in the game. And we use our scripting language instead of asking for new tech to make these new systems where a character will die when an ability score is reduced to 0. And when and this ability to create copies by stealing the energy from another character. So this is all from us. There's still a lot of combats that we could talk about. So if you want to chat with us, I'll be all these 3 days in the Larian booth, and we can nerd about combat. So thank you.
So my hearing is not that well, but I think you essentially asked, like, how do we measure how difficult a fight is with how much players die in a specific combat, sort of? Well, we really don't.
What?
So yeah, so we did have playtesters for a couple of months before release to give us feedback on the game, and they thankfully they were amazing help for us to know our own biases and understand what things we took for granted that players understood, and maybe suddenly they didn't, and also from the other end, they would start doing combat strategies that we never even thought about. So also to check what type of possibilities the players had, and to try and wherever it was needed, for them not to be too easily exploitable. But yeah, essentially we don't. Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
Hello? Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for this talk. I loved it. And I have a couple of questions. When designing a combat puzzle, do you take in account all the possible mechanic combinations between enemy and characters?
No.
And so where do you draw the line? Because there are a lot of bronze encounters. Do you make in gold encounters? Do you look for all the combinations or?
We simply try and. Do you want to answer this one?
I didn't heard it enough to.
If we take into account all the different possibilities for party compositions and power distributions, or when designing a fight.
We're trying to consider the broken things, but in general, we cannot test all the possible combinations of classes, subclasses, spells, and magic items. So we try to test it with as many combinations as possible, but we
And even items and new spells that are not really from raw that the player unlocks. There's just a lot of possibilities, so we just try to propose our own fight and have, as Paul says, the broken things covered. Like when we say broken, we mean OP strategies covered, and yeah, we just try to propose a combat that's going to be fun, no matter what the party composition is.
And the second question goes in this direction, which is how then do you playtest the different encounters, and how do you decide the difficulty?
Well,
Because
we just do. We simply grab a party of 4. We say, okay, we fight with this, and then we grab a different party of 4. Okay, how did it go with this other one? Maybe this other one had more CC, so we just have to balance a few things or stats so that it's not super vulnerable to, I don't know, wisdom checks. But we just do. We just test it, and we ask the playtesters to not all go with the same type of party compositions. But there's no like secret here. We just test it with as many different parties as much as we can.
thank you.
Hello.
Yep.
I was wondering how long does it take to design each combat, more or less.
You want to answer?
It will depend on the combat, but the initial paper design, we try to do it very quick. The hardest part is finding that uniqueness, that unique puzzle that we have for this combat. But when the idea comes, we make a quick paper design for the other combat designers to see. And if this combat is, if the design is good enough, we start implementing. And then we implement it, we iterate. We have our combat lead test it, and he will give us feedback, and we iterate some more. So it will also depend in if it's just a character that is mostly using player spells, it will be quicker. If we are starting to make things that are really more spectacular or more unique, it will take longer. But it will depend on the combat, and we always go back to a combat to fix bugs or to reiterate, or maybe a new class is created and we test it and we see that this class is really strong in this combat, so we make some changes.
Okay, thank you very much.
One second. To go a little bit more specific, from request up until combat research, it's usually like what, 2-3 days of work, like 8-hour days. But then the real work begins once all that process has been done and the puzzle has started, that could be, if it's gold, it could be weeks.
Yeah. And again, we will go back and reiterate
Exactly,
and
yeah.
fix.
Thank you.
Hi, thank
Hello.
you for a wonderful presentation. I have more of a question also because everything is connected to the narrative, and it's a very narrative-rich game. And so when it comes to early access games, of course, it's a huge challenge. I mean, we develop narrative-driven games, and this is where it's always like, with the testing and so on because of the battles, but then you have a story, and then how many players will go back and forth because of that. How did you make it work for you guys when it comes to early, because obviously it was a huge success,
Yeah.
early access and all, but it's a narrative. So how did, any tips when it comes to getting such a game with all this, obviously, battle side of things for the early access?
For early access,
Yeah. How did you set it all up that it actually works in your benefit?
I wasn't really in it for long during the early access period. I was, a year and a half? But one thing, a key takeaway that I have for early access is to listen to your community. And that may sound something very obvious, but check Reddit, check Twitter, check everything. Every single comment counts, or maybe some more than others. But if more than one player is complaining, hey, this mechanic was super obscure, what's up with that? I didn't really understand it or anything. Listen to your players. Especially if you have early access, if the game is already out there, that is a great tool for gathering feedback, which is essentially what Larian did and took huge advantage of. Anything else?
Each of us is looking for their combats in Google to see what the people say.
And
And
Google and
sometimes
YouTube
it's
and everything and
not
seeing
good.
the comments. So yeah, just pay attention to the community and they will give you invaluable feedback.
I have a question about raw research. Basically, since you're using Dungeons and Dragons, did you ever actually just play pen and paper to try a combat, or were you just waiting? Were you going into the game?
Well, not really, because while we try to take away as much from Dungeons and Dragons as we can, the pen and paper experience, it's still very different from the video game format, and it takes a lot of time.
Also, the combat team is really small for the size of this game, and so we need to go quick. So as soon as we have the initial design, we go to the engine, we forget about the paper design, and we implement and we iterate, and we let the game guide us, the video game guide us.
Yeah.
Not so much the paper, the tabletop.
Yeah, I wouldn't say always, but many times what we think is going to work on a paper design document, suddenly we get surprised of things that maybe we forgot or things that we thought were going to be easy to explain with feedback, and it's really not. So we try to get the paper design out of the oven as quick as possible so that we can actually iterate the thing, implement the thing that we want to implement and iterate upon it. So, sorry, the answer is no. We don't play our own combats in D&D format. Sorry.
Well, my question is a little bit personal. It's what's your favorite combat in the game in which you've worked, and also what was the most complicated one to make, the one in which you iterated the most?
Myself personally, the Steel Watcher Titan, because it was a new monster that is not in Raw. It's a boss fight in which we had to create a new character. There was a lot of animation challenges between the animation sets of the normal mode and the bulwark mode, the reaction system of when it transforms, and that I think was the most challenging for me. And I think my favorite one is actually Halcyon Portal, because for the amount of resources that we had to spend, which was very little, it ended up being a very impactful fight. So that's the one that I like the most. What about you?
And for me, My favorite, I'll tell you, Taris, the Githyanki prodigy. Again, it was like an emotional roller coaster because I was expecting to have a lot of new resources and new tech to get this combat done. And I had to do it all by hand and looking for assets to reuse. I had to script these new mechanics myself. And it looks complicated, but the scripting is really simple. And I don't know, I also really love the Githyanki. I did mostly every combat against Githyanki in the game. And this was like my Magnus Opus with Githyanki and Psionic combats. The most difficult, although I enjoy it, there is a combat in Act 3. It's you are entering the Baal temple, but there is a chasm, a really big chasm, a really big open area. And when you step in this area, you start getting ambushes. And those ambushes bleed into each other. And there's also a guy that, if you don't kill him in 5 turns, he will insta-kill you. But he's on the other side of the chasm. So this is a combat where it's really hard. It can be really frustrating if you don't like to engage with the mechanics. But if you do, if you try to teleport to the other place, if you try to use all your tools for it, it's really, really rewarding. And this is really hard because we have a lot of ambushes that are bleeding into each other. We have this guy that it can kill you as long as you are in some places. And it has these 5 turns to kill you. And it was really complicated. We're still iterating on it to make it perfect. But again, it's a very different combat with a lot of moving parts. So this is definitely the hardest.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. And the last question.
Okay, this question is coming from Twitch.
From Twitch. Yeah.
Do you have any sort of automatic or unit testing related to combat?
Related to combat? No.
I didn't hear.
New World, the automation for combat. No.
No, it's really done
By hand.
by hand. Yeah, we implemented, we tested again, we tested with our lead, we tested with all the combat team, and we let the playtesters test it, and we make changes for that. But we do it all by hand in the editor.
Yeah, but to be fair, it's something that we would like to explore in the future, because it really was a challenge to test as much as possible, because we couldn't test everything against everything. So automation for that would have been great, and that is something that we look forward for the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last question, because I think we're running out of time.
We have a question here.
She's coming, she's coming.
When you create encounter, you manage the cases when the player has.
I'm sorry, can you?
Sorry.
Yeah.
When you create encounter, you manage the case when the player have managed luck with special enemy traits. But when a player have so bad luck, a part of the checkbox in the player menu where is the resource to cancel the frustration of the player?
We don't really do that much to handle frustration.
No, I mean,
Oh, no.
There are mechanics,
we
and
do.
this is. I can relate to that. I don't know how I did it, but a lot of my combats had hard CC from the NPCs.
And with hard CC, what we mean is turn skipping statuses or things that the AI can do to you. So
Yeah, so especially multiplayer, if you get hard CC, you lose your turn. So it's like you are doing nothing, and you are just watching the NPCs and your friends playing the combat. So we reduced the number of CCs, we had countermeasures, we made sure that the NPCs that could CC you, we don't have a lot of them, and are clearly marked as the first objective in combat.
yeah.
So yeah, if there are something that is really, really frustrating, we will take it into consideration and make changes.
There's actually this one phrase from my lead, which at first I thought it was, yeah, it's obvious, but then it was that playing is fun and not playing is not fun. So that's sort of, it really makes sense, especially on multiplayer. If you wait for 2 minutes or 3 minutes for the round to go around and for it to be your turn, and you don't play, even if it's part of the combat, it's not fun. So instead of making, I don't know, hold person, we do slow, which really limits you, but you still can do things. Instead of, instead of turn skipping things, we just go for limiting the range of possibilities that the player has. Or we try to go for that. Yep. Okay. Thank you very much, guys.